its own chapter, starting with self-promotional, lawless, corrupt, unscientific, incompetent, partisan, hypocritical, and neglectful. I'll just give you a little preview of those. Self-promotional. Is there anyone here who doubts that Gavin Newsom used the arrival of the coronavirus on our shores to launch his 2024 presidential campaign? That appeared to be his main focus. How do I get myself in the news? He went on all the big talk shows, the daytime shows, Ellen DeGeneres, The View. He was on The Daily Show. He was on Jimmy Kimmel. His press advisories were must-see TV, or at least he thought so. They'd be advertised breathlessly in all caps. Tune in, coronavirus press conference. His media advisories would hype major announcement, and then it would turn out to be like a stay-at-home order. But there was something that was bothering the governor during these early months. You know, he was reveling in all of this attention. But one thing was really bothering him, and that's that there was another governor on the other side of the country who was getting a lot more of it. I mean, Cuomo's press conferences got carried live on CNN. He just won an Emmy for them, if you can believe that. And so Newsom got increasingly desperate, coming up with new ploys, new gambits, just making stuff up, new announcements to try to get himself in the news. The Sacramento Bee editorial board, which had endorsed him, dubbed him Governor Gaslight. To puff himself up, he decided he needed to make California something more than just one of the 50 states. So he declared California a nation state. I mean, surely Cuomo couldn't compete with that, right? And this, of course, all culminated with one of the biggest scandals that we've ever seen. When Governor Newsom decided to make a $1 billion no-bid deal with one of the world's sketchiest companies, BYD China, which is run by the Communist Party, which has ties to forced labor. And he did it just so he could make a big splashy announcement on the Rachel Maddow show. This was a long time ago. This was like April 7th. And it worked initially. The very next day, that morning, you could almost hear the sound of champagne corks popping in the governor's office. President Newsom had started trending on Twitter. I can assure you this. That will never again be trending on Twitter. Unless it's, you know, ironic. What I think we're much more likely to see trending is hashtag former Governor Newsom.
Yeah.
Amen. The next chapter is titled Lawless. On April 1st, Gavin Newsom announced that he was going to use the coronavirus as an opportunity for a new progressive era. Quote, that's a quote, an opportunity to reshape the way we do business and the way we govern. To accomplish that, he abolished representative democracy in the state of California. He shredded our Constitution, checks and balances, separation of powers, the institutions of self-government that make this country what it is. That's why we took him to court, that's why we sued him, and that's why we won in a decision ruling that he had violated our Constitution. You know, in one of his briefs to the Court of Appeal, the very first sentence of the brief that Governor Newsom submitted says, "This case is not about a dictatorship in ancient Rome." Maybe not a good sign. We have to clarify that right up front. And in the concluding statement at our trial, his attorney said, you know, Mr. Kiley's ideas about checks and balances, they work well in theory. In theory? I think over 2 centuries of American history show they work pretty well in practice as well.
Yeah.
The next chapter is titled Corrupt. Do you remember when we had an economic recovery task force last year? Remember that? It was like an 80-member commission. Anyone remember who Gavin Newsom put in charge?
Disney CEO.
He was on the commission and resigned, but the guy who was put in charge, I'll give you a hint, vanity presidential candidate, plaid ties, Tom Steyer.
Oh, God.
It seems like ancient history since this thing was such a complete, you know, waste of time, everyone's time. It was disbanded at the end of last year, but he put in charge of California's economic recovery Tom Steyer, the vanity presidential candidate, who, by the way, was the single largest Democrat political donor in United States history. That's who Gavin Newsom put in charge of our economic recovery. which shows you what's probably the most defining feature of him in my view, which is why I use the word corrupt in the title. That he is someone who is willing to sell his powers to the highest bidder. And at a time when those powers became absolute, this last year, the consequences were absolutely devastating. Perhaps the worst example is our kids, who have been, languishing at home under inadequate distance learning, with more severe school closures than any state in the country, even though the science said exactly the opposite, at the behest of his biggest campaign donor, causing incalculable harm to millions of kids. If that doesn't make you the most corrupt governor in America, I don't know what does.
His kids go to school.
That's right.
Yep.
I'll get to that in a second, actually.
Okay, sorry.
See, that's the thing. Every time you think you're at the end of the line, he does something else. So the next chapter is titled Unscientific. Does anyone follow Gavin Newsom on Twitter, by the way?
No. Hell no.
I wouldn't recommend it. But I want to read you a few tweets from Gavin Newsom. And understand, when I raise my voice a little, that's when he's using all caps. He really enjoys all caps. On April 14th, Governor Newsom tweeted, "When it comes to reopening, science," got it, that's the all caps part, "not politics, must be California's guide." 2 weeks later, this seemed to be a little bit of a shot at Cuomo, he tweeted, "The West Coast is and will continue to be guided by science." On May 4th, "California is led by data and science." June 24th, "This isn't about politics, it's about science." The next day, "Dr. Fauci is right. This isn't about politics, it's about science." Now, he wasn't clear on whether Fauci had himself screamed the word. But does anyone know who Nate Silver is? Yeah. He runs the 538 website. Many people, many liberals, consider him sort of the high priest of data science. And data analysis. Here's what he had to say. "Not that I had a particularly high opinion of it before, but the irrational and not very science-driven regime of COVID policies in California, coupled with the hypocrisy of so many elected officials there, has really lowered my opinion of the quality of governance in that state." Gavin Newsom's worst in the nation lockdowns has led to some of the worst in the nation public health outcomes. And that's because it's flown in the face of what science has recommended. As he's closed more small businesses than any state, as he's closed schools longer than any state, as he's done things like ban outdoor dining and playgrounds, and told people not to go to the beach, and all manner of other restrictions that pretty much California is the only state that's done anything like that. He's had curfews that all of the scientists say don't make any sort of difference. So while he's shouting at us at how doing this social media chest beating about science, we know it's been exactly the opposite, that it's been all about politics when it comes to Gavin Newsom. Okay, the fifth adjective is incompetent. Now, of course, the EDD will come to mind, right?
Oh, God.
The EDD is the new poster child for government incompetence. Just today, we learned there are still 1 million claims in the backlog. That's like an all-time high, actually. And $31 billion is the latest estimate for the fraud. Never in history, perhaps, has a ball been as momentously dropped as Gavin Newsom's, presiding over this train wreck of the EDD. But what I actually begin this chapter with is the data glitch. Do you remember this? There's been so many scandals, you lose track of them. But this was last year, and we were all told our lives are being run on the basis of data. And then we learned that because of their negligence, all the data was wrong, and counties were flying blind. And after this, something very interesting happened. Gavin Newsom, you couldn't avoid him. He was everywhere. He was over our TVs, everywhere you looked, he was there. Suddenly, he disappeared for a week, almost a week. He wasn't to be seen. It kind of reminded me of, the South Carolina governor, Mark Sanford, when he disappeared. Well, he was off with an Argentinian mistress. There was nothing as salacious here. With Gavin Newsom, he was just hiding. Dr. Galley was told to go out in front of the public and apologize.
Bring it up.
Hey, they're backing you up.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
I'm being canceled, I think. That's Newsom's speech.
You're probably right.
And then the day before he finally emerges, his public health director resigns. And the next day, the press asks him, why does he resign? And he says, oh, that's a private personnel matter, as if this was an employee of his Plump Jack winery. The next chapter, partisans. Gavin Newsom is the most partisan governor in the United States. In 2019, he tweeted about Mitch McConnell 27 times. What does Mitch McConnell have to do with governing California?
Yeah, it is.
I know.
It is.
I think they're related.
We can hear you.
There you go. We finally have live music in California.
It's appropriate. You're telling us we don't have to live like refugees anymore.
There you go. But Newsom took this to perverse levels during COVID. He released a chart supposedly ranking red and blue states by COVID cases. Totally spurious chart, and actually at the time it was the opposite trend in California, that the red counties were doing better than the blue counties. The seventh adjective, hypocritical. Do I even need to say any more?
French laundry.
Let me actually read you a couple more tweets.
Okay.
If you can take a few more. And again, when I raise my voice, that's the all caps. It actually wasn't a tweet, but when Newsom first announced the mask mandate, he said, we're simply put, we are seeing too many people with faces uncovered. Reproached the public, blamed us, as he has throughout. Then he tweeted, don't be selfish. Don't be selfish, wear a mask. He tweeted it again, don't be selfish, wear a mask. On 17 occasions, he tweeted in all caps, wear a mask, or wear your mask, or wear, period, period, mask, period. There were dozens of others in conversational volume, in lowercase, wear a mask. There was be kind, wear a mask. There was be smart, wear a mask. There was a little, hymn about mask wearing as a sign of toughness, a sign of someone who gives a damn, which Newsom called a beautiful thing. And then there was, me again, you really, 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 really need to wear a mask. Shortly after that came the French laundry. The eighth adjective in Newsom's worst in the nation COVID response is neglectful. Because everything besides the one thing that he seems to relish, which is restricting human activity, California has lagged behind the rest of the country. And I wrote this before the vaccine disaster had fully played out. When it came to testing, when it came to protecting vulnerable populations like nursing homes or even prisons, one liberal Democrat said that after talking to the governor, we had the worst prison public health screw-up in California history. And when it came to the California Health Corps. I don't know if you remember this, but we had 94,000 healthcare professionals sign up to volunteer to assist people in California. At the time late last year, when Newsom imposed the latest stay-at-home order because of limited ICU capacity, do you know how many of those 94,000 were actually deployed? 21, not 21,000, 21. And honestly, this is symbolic of what we're all used to in California. It's the same thing as when we pay the highest taxes, yet drive over the deepest potholes. We sacrifice the most and get the least in return. Even before COVID, California's problems were boiling over. You know, we supposedly have the 5th largest economy in the world, yet we have up to half the nation's homeless. We have the worst poverty, we have the worst inequality, we have the worst outcomes for poor kids in our schools. Our infrastructure is about the worst in the country. Even before COVID, 53% of Californians said they're thinking of leaving. Think about that. When over half of your people want out, that's called a failed state. As we all know, California has so many advantages, but our state's natural beauty and its countless wonders and our people, the peerless aptitude of our people, it's being overwhelmed by the failure of our politics. And this recall is a chance to fix our politics.
Yes.
It's a chance to root out corruption. It's a chance to restore government by the people. That's the larger meaning of the recall. It's not just putting a new person, occupant, in the governor's office. It's about repudiating everything the current occupant stands for. It's a fundamental course correction, an emphatic rejection of the status quo. It's millions of people saying with one voice, enough is enough, and giving full expression to that timeless phrase from our Declaration of Independence, the consent of the government. It's about we, the people,
Yes.
taking matters into our own hands.
Yes.
And what that, means, what happens after we get rid of Newsom? Well, there's one other service he's provided, and that's actually to give us a roadmap for how to turn our state around. And that's simply to do exactly the opposite of everything that he has done. I'm not kidding. When you look at those 8 qualities, the opposite of Newsom's self-promotional mode of governance is humility. To have a smaller, more humble role for our government. So it's not running our lives, so power is held at the local level where it's closest to the people. The opposite of Newsom's lawless mode of governance is a new respect for the rule of law, so we're following the Constitution. The opposite of Newsom's corrupt mode of governance is one based on the public interest, so we're serving the people, not lobbyists and special interests. The opposite of Newsom's unscientific mode of governance is one that is accountable to data and to facts. The opposite of Newsom's incompetent mode of governance is one that is based upon citizen service, customer service, a performance-based government. The opposite of Newsom's partisan mode of governance is to bring people together to actually solve problems, unity. The opposite of Newsom's hypocritical mode of governance is transparency. The transparency of public officials for their decisions, so we're not having a government that's basically making decisions in the dark, and we're not giving special perks to lawmakers, like a secret DMV office. And finally, the opposite of Gavin Newsom's neglectful mode of governance is one that recognizes our responsibilities. Satisfying short-term political demands has been the way of the Capitol for way too long. We need a new model of political leadership that's based upon a enduring stewardship of the public interest. So in closing, we have an election coming up if all goes well. There's been 1.4 million signatures gathered. Truly amazing. And that number is growing. We have till March 17th to submit 1.5 million valid signatures. Now some people say, well, aren't we going to have an election in 2022 anyway? That's awfully close.
No, not close.
Well, first of all, Newsom would have 2 more years to continue to wreak havoc in our state. But I actually think the timing is ideal, and here's why. Because any legislators who don't get the message that the era of corruption in California is over will have to face voters themselves the following year. And reformers can run alongside the new governor. The people can affirm his or her agenda. They can cement the recall's goals, so that this isn't just some ephemeral moment of activism, but this extraordinary movement, this act of popular sovereignty, gets imprinted into the very structure of California life and reshuffles the stacked deck of our political system. That's something that will have a lasting impact. That'll set our state on a whole new course, and there will be nothing that we can't achieve at that point. California will stop leading the nation in poverty and inequality and homelessness, and we'll start leading again in the right ways. We'll reclaim what we've always stood for, opportunity, innovation, daring, the ability of a free people to make tomorrow better than today. So thank you all very much. Let's recall this governor, and I'll be over there signing books.